Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Debris. A great episode. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, picking up where the last episode, like Shelby and Brian trying to figure things out. It's like, okay, like, got to get back to Finola. Like, well, how do I do that? Shelby's like, it's like, because like Brian is like, all right, we got to do this before Grace shows up, because like she's gonna try and like, we got to do this before they shut this off. And it's like, all right, we got, because it turns out in this particular reality, it's like, or was it the next one? I'm trying to remember. No, I think, well, because yeah, they need to get to the next reality, and obviously Grace is doing whatever she can, so she ends up shooting Brian. Goes into the water. Like, from what we saw, and it's interesting that, like, there's never been, like, back-to-back partners in realities. So, like, the fact is, Brian got Grace in that reality, but he also gets Grace in the next reality. And what's also interesting, I mean, it is technically time travel, so he is bumping into another reality, but it's like, okay, I'm replacing the version of me in this reality, and it's like, okay, that bullet wound I had is gone. I'm partners with Grace, and it's just like, for him, it's like, shit, it didn't work, and it's just like, he's frustrated talking to Grace again. And it's like, oh, you wait outside. Oh, yeah. Then goes inside, and we get a major twist of Kathleen. I was like, oh my God. I was like, no! Brian literally falls, because it's like, me and Shelby were working together, and it's like, it didn't work because Finola's not my partner, your brother's not here, it's you. And for her, it's like, ever since they did it, she hasn't gone back. And so it's like, oh no, this is all wrong. So it's like, it's like, well, what do we do? It's like, we got to talk to George Jones. He's the only one that can help us figure this out, because it's like, yeah, he doesn't have Finola, she doesn't have her brother, and it's like, Brian, he's been through this now a couple times, so he's like feeling Kathleen in, because this version of Kathleen's only done it like ever since her and Shelby split. This Kathleen has only done it the one time, so for her, like, she's, the reality he's in now, it's like, okay, he's like, all right, let me fill you in on everything. So, all right, we got to try and figure this out. But then Grace breaks the news to him when it's like, Brian's like, I just need time to figure this out. And she's like, George Jones is dead. And you're like, no! It's like, we just killed him like a little bit ago. You killed him a little bit ago at Influx's headquarters. They're like, oh my God, in this reality, he doesn't have Finola to kind of shift him up, because Finola is what kept him. She kind of brought that humanity back to him, and like that connection, them opening up to each other, is what led to him not doing it. So in this reality, he just followed Maddox's orders. So maybe kind of implying like a lot of the shady stuff that was going on in the original reality that we've come to know, 1.0. Once again, 1.0 just being what we've known so far. A lot of that stayed the same, but it's like he didn't have Finola to be there. Like, we don't even know what Finola's circumstances are in this reality. Like the previous one, we know she was like still working for MI6 and stuff like that. So she just didn't work with this whole orbital thing. So, and that was fascinating. So Kathleen kind of takes it in her own hands, and when she does, she restarts reality. Brian's like right behind her, but he ends up getting reset, and then it's like, I was like, well, all right, who's Brian's new partner? Not Brian anymore. Finola's here. Brian's gone. And it's just like, oh my God, what's going on? And so Finola shows up with her new partner, Gibson. And then it's a situation of like, okay, Kathleen has to fill her in about like, yeah, you have a partner, Brian, and everything, my brother. And obviously she calls her dad in this reality, and it turns out her dad is working at Orbital, and who the hell is sitting across from him? Maddox. It's like, oh, I guess there's no beef in this reality between you two. It also turns out freaking Brian's a war criminal in this continuity, because it's like, because Maddox tried to reach out to him, but because he didn't take Maddox's help, no matter how much Maddox tried to reach out for him, like, Brian went full dark side. And once again, I think I've talked about this on a multitude of occasions. I might even brought it up last episode. Hear me geek out the way I am about this. Like, that hardcore sci-fi shit I love. It's like alternate realities, multiverses, timeline. It's so good. You would never think I used to not care for the science fiction. I was like, science fiction is cool. Dude, it's not till like my teenage years, until like probably my earlier 20s, where I really got into sci-fi, and like I've dived deeper into it. This is some cool shit that's like, it just sends your brain off like firing off I mean, once again, it's like a multiverse thing where it's like every choice you ever make, like the like repercussions of just like what things could be. It just because it just makes you go like, we'll never get answers, but it's like what worked out so differently in this reality that Maddox and George are still working together, present day. That Maddox doesn't want George dead, needed him dead, you know? So it's like, what worked differently in this reality and stuff like that. So that's such a fascinating thing to think about. But also, like, once again, the choices and stuff like that. We've seen the choices Brian made, and we've seen the good choices of Brian. That means we haven't seen, like, we hear about it in this particular reality of, yeah, he's a war criminal. Oh, that was close. It's like, damn, that's so sad to think that, like, he's a full-blown bad guy. Essentially kind of a, you know, being a war criminal, I guess, and everything is kind of like but it's still like, dude, he's kind of like a bad guy in this reality, and it's kind of, you know, that's so just interesting. Once again, your choices and stuff like that, just like there's a different version of you out there in the multiverse living maybe a very similar life, just slight deviation from who you are, or maybe a major deviation from who you are. It's just like, you know, you just never know with that stuff. So that was interesting. And so, like, obviously they're running out of time, and it's like, we need to fix this. So I'm trying to remember. I think what ended up happening is, I believe, Kathleen did it. She reset it, and then when Finola shows up again, it's like, okay, I got to fill you in on everything. I believe I'm blurring so much together, but obviously she ends up talking to Brian because it's like, right, all these different realities, and we see the Brian and Shelby that we've kind of known, and it's like they're trying to communicate, like, you know, and it's like before Brian could say anything, it ends up disappearing. And the thing is, it's like, yeah, he said we should talk to your dad, and she's like, my dad is dead. And it's like, no, like that ends up being the next circumstance of like the next time they talk, the next reality, where it's like, okay, crap stuff is happening because of everything. It's like the realities are falling apart faster because because in the previous reality, it was like, right, she had talked to her dad, and it was like, okay, she said this, and it's like, she kept telling the lie because Brian got it in her head about lying, because it was like, because she's like, my brother isn't a liar. It's like, yeah, but your brother was so desperate to get back to you, he knew that if he told us the truth, that the debris would be taken from him, and he'd never have a chance to kind of fix things, so he lied, because he was just that desperate to get back to you, which she's like, I understand, desperate to get back to Finola. Because that's also an interesting thing, too. He's like, neither one of us is being really honest about what we want. You know? So once again, this is something I commented recently with someone, like, that particular Brian, he's like, oh, I want to get back to my partner, Finola. What if my suggestion was, we don't know that Brian's history. What if in his reality, him and Finola are even closer than 1.0 Brian and Finola? Like, what if there's an intimacy thing there? That became a conversation about, like, you know, maybe that's even more reason why he's desperate to get... Like, for Brian, it's like, in 1.0, those feelings might be there, they're bubbling, but maybe in the reality this particular Brian's from, like, they might have a full-blown relationship why he's so desperate to get back to her. It's like, you know, or maybe it's a thing of it was there, but he was just never willing to kind of take the leap. Like, maybe this version of Brian is a lot more willing to, like, you know, neither one of us is willing to admit what we really want. So there's just so many ways you could kind of end up ultimately interpreting a lot of that stuff. So it's just, once again, it's just like there's just so many realms of possibilities, and you never get the answer to it. But I kind of like that because it's left up to your own imagination. But because I overthink everything, so like I said, my mind is going at like a million miles an hour about like the different possibilities of what like this stuff could be. Once again, we'll never get answers to it. But that was always the interesting thing to me, was going to be like, well, what's the solution ultimately going to be for these? What the circumstances were going to be like, how to like fix this, you know, situation. Obviously, I threw out last episode some like thoughts about potentially how it could all get wrapped up. But basically, having restart, you know, the reality again or whatever, and Finola remembering things. It's like she talks to Brian, and it's like, okay, Brian says like he's worked with like a Finola, like, and Finola, one of the Finolas came close to the conclusion of like something called bilateral deviation, and it's like, okay, like we have to like, and he was like, we don't know what that means because that Finola disappeared before he had an opportunity to learn from her like what that was all about. And obviously this Finola is like, I don't know. It's like, oh, contact your dad. It's like, my dad's dead in this reality, and Brian's like, ugh. But the question then becomes like, is he actually dead in this reality, or is it because the circumstances haven't presented themselves to be? I mean, the fact is, I feel like even because he has to be dead in this reality, because that means like. Because I think Ferris would have still came to the conclusion and stuff like that. But maybe it's like because she intercepted a conversations between Maddox and Brian, that maybe that kind of made that happen. But it's also like maybe that still could apply between Maddox and whoever her partner is. But also it's like, once again, it's like we don't know like all the other extenuating circumstances of these particular realities. So these might not just be like slight deviations, they might be like major deviations. Once again, implications are just like endless and infinite. But Brian says like, you said that basically the debris came here for a reason. You believe in the world, you helped save it. But she's like, I don't know. And it's like, well, we need more time to kind of make this happen. So they reset things again, and she ends up in a new reality where she finds out her dad's alive. Because it's like, what? Her new partner's like, whoa, your dad's dead? I literally just talked to him yesterday. And it's like, wait, what? So she calls up her dad, which obviously, in this reality, he's also working at Orbital. But obviously, talks about the bilateral thing. And this ends up being the really interesting thing I was curious about. Because I was starting to think, I was like, whoa. Since we have Shelby and Brian doing this, and we have Kathleen doing it, I was like, wait. Are we implying that this is the original Kathleen and Shelby just in two different realities, and that's what this ends up being? That's what the bilateral deviation was all about. I was like, that's so interesting, because like when they did it one time, they both split and went into different realities. Shelby's been doing it multiple times, but like Kathleen's just been stuck in this particular reality, because she said initially, like after like they got separated, she got so scared she didn't want to go back in there. But Shelby, on the other hand, has been going over and over again, because Kathleen's desperate too, because for her, she blames herself, because it's like Shelby didn't even want to do it, and she's the one that pressured her to do it the first time and didn't do it over and over and over again. So for her, it's like, I'm the one that kind of created these circumstances. So but kind of figuring things out, Finola's like, okay, essentially, like if we never got to speak again, Dad, what would you say to me? And it was it's just like, that I love you. And she's like, I love you too, because like obviously she didn't know, like whatever new reality she ends up popping in afterwards, or whatever happens, is like, you're dead in my reality, like I don't know the next world, you might not be there either. So that's what she kind of needed to hear. And I think that's kind of a little, obviously it's a little similar than for like 1.0, like George, his conversation with Finola like 2 episodes ago. But it's like the context is different, but it's like the sentiment is kind of the same. But I think the sentiment is a little more heartfelt, because like I said, the sentiment in that one was kind of very much like, whatever sacrifices I made was necessary because this is for the greater good. So that kind of comes first before. So like this had a little more sentimentality behind it, at least for me. But now it's a situation of like, all right, we got to reset again to give ourselves. No, this is where they were like, once again, this is thing I don't remember like whether or not, I think they just talked to Brian and Shelby this time, because it's like she's the one that ends up ultimately figuring out. It's like, oh, we got to find Shelby and Brian. It's like, all right, there they are, let's talk to him. And like basically saying that because this started because Kathleen and Shelby went in together, because the entire time, like, you had George suggesting Shelby, and then eventually Kathleen has to go back, like go to the very moment, to the same second of when they initially activated the piece of debris. But now it's like, no, it's still got to come full circle, because what happened? What's the first instigator for all this? You both being in the device at the same time. So basically now we got to synchronize across realities, which also speaks a lot of things too, because, or to be fair, I was about to say, because like realities, like you never know whether like the time stream is exactly the same across timelines and realities. I mean, that's something I'm always unclear about. Like, just like, is every world across like a multiverse on the same? I'm applying a lot of like multiverse stuff that I don't know if they would classify this necessarily as multiverse, whatever the case may be. But it's like, do like parallel worlds, like you take like the Arrowverse's multiverse. It's like, does Earth 1, 2, and 3 play at the same axis? So if it's 8:52 a.m. in North Carolina on Earth 1, will it be the same on Earth 2 and 3, or would things be off a little bit? That's just kind of where my mind goes. But even if that were the case, these realities are bleeding together. So they're, the whole point is eventually they're going to be so on top of each other, they're going to eventually collapse, and it's going to be the end, space time continuum collapsing upon itself. But regardless, they synchronize the watches. All right, 2 minutes, we're going to make this happen. And obviously for Finola, it's like, if we do this, like, will we remember any of this? Because my initial thought was like, okay, like, how are you going to, like, okay, we're going to fix everything, because it's like, where it began is where it has to end, so it has to all kind of come full circle, which kind of works as a time travel thing, because, like, a lot of stuff, like, God, it's one of those time travel things of like, oh, this has to happen for this to happen. So it becomes like an Ouroboros thing of like a snake eating its own tail. Like a lot of time travel stories end up being that. So it's almost like that to a certain extent of like, yeah, the end has to be the beginning and the beginning has to be the end. We own some 12 monkey shit right here. Sorry. Side note, if you're super into sci-fi and you're looking for a time travel show, watch 12 Monkeys. It's a damn good time travel show. Honestly, next to Legends of Tomorrow, because Legends of Tomorrow is just fantastic in its own right, just because it's such a wacky, weird show. It's like fantastic in it, but it's like if you're looking for something a little like grittier and like more serious, then like 12 Monkeys is up your alley. 4 fantastic seasons. I'm sure you can find Blu-ray stuff like that, but I know you can also watch the entire series on Hulu if I'm not mistaken. This isn't a plug for 12 Monkeys, but it was on my mind right now. I've done videos talking about like 4 particular time travel shows I really like. If you're curious about what some of those other 2 are, since I mentioned 2 right here, be sure to check out the video. You can find it somewhere on my channel. Regardless, God, chilling up the wazoo, aren't I? I went on a whole tangent, but it was gonna be a thing of like, right, so like, does that mean that every versions of you guys, like, across this thing, like, every time there's a new reality that's, like, set and stuff like that, I was like, does that mean that everyone goes back to the original realities, like, the reality that Brian is from, and Kathleen, because Kathleen and Shelby are from 1.0. This Brian isn't from 1.0. He's from a different later reality. So that's why I was like, and obviously this Finola isn't from the same reality that Brian's from. Say that Brian's from reality 10, she's from reality 15 or something like that. So that's why I'm like, it's always interesting how that was going to work. So I was like, and ultimately synchronizing that bad boy, because it was like, yeah, the bleeding started of covering the entire house, and it's like, nope, this is your last shot. You were already running out of time. Now it's clear, you got to do, because every time they'd get back there, it'd be like, oh, we don't even need the device to tell us. Look at that. It's super clear where all the stuff is going down. So, they do it, they're synchronizing, and blam, it's like, we go back to 1.0, and it's like, oh, it's Brian and Finola, and it's like, oh, yeah, hey, like where we kind of started when they first started this, and they show up and they see that it's like, oh, hey, Brian, it's in the ocean, Brian, and then we see Kathleen walk up, so it's like Brian and Finola don't remember, but Shelby and Kathleen remember everything, it seems, because it makes sense. It started with them, so their memories are more in, because this is their original reality, so they got kind of pushed back. Brian and Finola, this version of Brian and Finola were left behind because Shelby had jumped to a new reality. I mean, once again, we never actually got to see him meet 1.0, because by the time we got introduced to this whole thing in the episode, he'd already met Brian and Finola like a couple times, so, oh, dude, I was like, that's crazy. Because I'd suggest, this kind of acts as a spoilers. If you don't want spoilers for Fringe, I don't know how to, like, skate around it. It's been a couple years, so I'm sorry. But this is what I was kind of implying last episode when I was like, is this going to have, like, a Fringe ending? And to a certain extent, kind of. It kind of has a Fringe ending, so I thought that was kind of interesting. But I thought it was, it's like, nah, they're here, and they have all their memories, so that's such an interesting thing. It's like, yeah, get the piece of debris, it's back there. But, yeah, it's actually kind of sad, too, because it's like, right, I mean, I guess it's like the other versions of Shelby with his brothers, because he has 2 different brothers in different realities and doesn't have Kathleen. But it's just like, it's kind of sad to know that, but it's also like, I think, because that's the thing of like, does that imply that all those other realities disappeared? So are we like Crisis on Infinite Earthiness? Like, we got to reset but everything's like on, like we're only one timeline, or are we back to like no, it is like a multiverse where like all those realities are still out there and existing. It's just like they're back in the original slot. Like obviously it's like the analogy of like, oh, it's a deck of cards, you're pulling out random cards, all those cards are back in the appropriate slot, so all those other realities are out there somewhere, we just don't have access to them. Or like I said, did everything just get completely reset and we're just back to one? I don't know. I like to believe like all those different realities are still out there. Probably won't play a role in it, which once again is also a Fringe thing too, because I almost forgot. I was like, right, like they delved into this in Fringe as well. Like that ends up being a thing of like at least like two main like realities, timelines and parallel worlds, because that becomes like a major storyline for Fringe. But regardless, tangents and all that side. So that was an interesting thing. So they're gonna tell you everything that we know about our like misadventures together and stuff like that, the different versions of you. That's gonna be interesting. But then we get the Maddox thing, which was interesting because it's like, oh, so we're picking up this like, oh, his wife set that dinner reservation. Is like, he's like, what's that about? And he's calling Julia, but he kind of hangs up. We don't get to see, like, the next scene shows us him going home. So I'm like, is that supposed to imply that in this reality he talked to her regardless, and then when he goes back home, he gets the divorce papers? Is that what that's implying, or is that supposed to imply that in this reality he's like, maybe he's like, I'm not going to bother her about it, and he wasn't suspicious, so in this reality, maybe suggesting, like, that scene never happened. Like, I don't know which way they're leaning with that, but at the end result still ends up being the same, because she was still going through with the divorce. It seems like in this one is kind of implying, because the way he was like, no, like it's almost like he was completely blindsided. At least there it's like he knew ahead of time of her being like, no, we're still going through with it, despite him trying to talk her out of it. You know, he threw his phone and everything. So it seemed like in this reality it was like in 1.0 it's kind of like, now that we're back in 1.0 it's like, oh no, like that him going to the restaurant didn't happen in this reality. So that's just kind of like, I think that's just kind of like a little thing to be like, oh, we throw this thing out there showing you, yeah, things are still different because this is 1.0, like other things shifted and played out a little differently across other realities. Once again, certain conversations, you know, like the one that was had between, I'm blanking on home dude's name now. The dude that George is with right now, which I'm sure that's going to be an interesting conversation for him to be like, oh, this is so fascinating, the implications of it all, yada, like big science brain, like nerdgasm about it, I'm sure. Ha ha ha, nerdgasm, yeah, I know. But nevertheless, like, this is my jam, dude. I'm glad that everything kind of has a happy resolution. To a certain extent, I guess you could, once again, depending on how they wanted to play this, you could look at this as like, oh, everything worked out, everything slotted back the way it is. Or once again, if they wanted to lean it this way, like I said, I'm leaning more towards like, oh, everything's just back in the appropriate slots. Like, you know, like I said, every reality's back to the way it originally was. Everyone's back to their OG reality and stuff like that. But it could be seen as a depressing thing. Oh yeah, every other reality got deleted. I don't think that's the case, but you know, it depends on how they want to handle it. Once again, it's not science, it's science fiction, so you know, you can kind of do whatever you want to, kind of break the rules. As long as you establish your own rules, you can kind of do whatever you want to within your own universe. But nevertheless, like, shoot, dude, this is so exciting. So quite the misadventure. Like I said, I also appreciate it because this is the first two-parter in the show too, so I thought that was interesting. But I'm really interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Got to pick up where things kind of left off initially at the beginning of last episode about George and helping find that piece that Influx is at looking for. Oh, we also had like Anson, like somehow that SOB was able to, I guess, touching that guy, he created a psychic link. Part of me wonders, I was like, maybe some technology that connects to, like, he's able to see through home dude's eyes or something like that. Like, maybe by making eye contact with him, it's like, oh, I created, like, some technological psychic link. I don't know. Because part of me was wondering, is like, could that be why he knows George's song? The one that, like, you know, because he was humming it when he was initially arrested. So it's like, we still never got an answer to that. Is it because he just heard George while George was working on it? Or did he kind of create some kind of connection between them that's still there? Whatever the case may be, he now knows the code to opening the door, so it's, you know, it's like, oh, his escape's only a matter of time. So setting that up, that obviously we're far from done with Influx. I mean, that's still needs to be dealt with because it's still a rampant issue, but also is like one of their top agents. Well, we don't even know he's top agent, but one of their go-to guys is about to bust out. So it's going to be interesting to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.